Welcome to our podcast on caste discrimination and access to justice for lower caste children in cases of sexual violence with Dr. Shailesh Kumar. The discussion where we dwell into the fascinating intersections of law, criminology, and social justice. I'm your host, Heman, Senior Research Associate at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. Today, we have the privilege of introducing a brilliant mind and passionate academic, someone whose work transcends disciplinary boundaries and sheds light on crucial issues affecting our society. Joining us in extending a warm welcome to Shailesh Kumar, an interdisciplinary socio-legal researcher, criminologist, and ethnographer currently based at the renowned University of London. Is a prominent figure in the field, Kumar not only imparts knowledge but also inspires a generation of law, criminology, and policing students through his invaluable teachings. In the words of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, so long as we do not achieve social liberty, whatever freedom is provided by the law is of no avail to you. Inspired by this profound statement, Shailesh Kumar continues to champion the cause of social justice, tirelessly striving to bridge the gap between legal framework and the lived realities of marginalized communities. Dr. Sailesh's journey as a scholar has been characterized by an unwavering commitment to social justice, evident in his groundbreaking PhD research. He conducted a qualitative empirical study on the experiences and perceptions of stakeholders involved in cases of child sexual violence in India, focusing on reforms introduced through the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012. His work sheds light on the multifaceted challenges faced by judicial officers, prosecutors, and the defense counselors. Let's embrace ourselves for an intellectual feast as Dr. Shailesh Kumar takes us on a journey unraveling the complexities of caste discrimination and shining a light on the path towards a more just and equitable society. Get ready to be inspired, challenged, and empowered as we dwell into the depth of his expertise and passion. Welcome, Dr. Shailesh Kumar, to the South Asia Research Institute for Minorities podcast. Let the transformative conversation begin. So, my first question is, Dr. Sailesh, can you please share with us what initiative sparked your interest in social legal research and your journey towards becoming an interdisciplinary researcher and academic? What significant life events or moments influenced you to pursue this career?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Heman, and thanks to the Institute. I really appreciate for giving me the opportunity to talk about such an important subject matter. And I think, and I do believe that this subject cuts across South Asia and the entire globe, and particularly the Indian subcontinent, because of course, its very peculiar social and cultural sort of factors that are there. So thank you so much once again. And before I begin our conversation, I'd like to give sort of content warning, because of course this is a very sensitive topic that we will be discussing, and I think it's very important for the audience to know that there will be certain incidents, certain factors discussed that might be sensitive or graphic in nature. Because we ultimately will be discussing sexual violence, and that too sexual violence against children. So just to make you as well as the audience aware about the content that will be discussed during this conversation. So on that note, and also on the note that you said, and I would like to pick from there, which is, I think, you might have seen that that's the Ambedkar's quote that you gave is also in all my emails at the bottom, which is the relationship between social liberty and law. And that's very important, I think. And I think I would say that it's that relationship that generated, or let's say sparked, as you have mentioned in your question, my interest in social legal research. So I would say it wasn't a conscious step, to study law and then to get into social legal research. At one point of time, I was very much a science student. I'm sure most of the students who are in social sciences, depending on which area of India they come from, tend to be from science background. And then something happens if that's not a conscious decision. And I think this is also sometimes shaped by your background, your socioeconomic background, because traditionally people go for social sciences and humanities subjects only when they do not need a quick, let's say, output in terms of monetary benefits. No, you don't need a quick salary to maybe sustain your family or to build a house or to sustain your parents and all those things. So otherwise, people tend to go for sciences where they can, or let's say, other subjects, more so professional subjects where they can get quick money or a job, especially, right? So for me, it was an accident. I got into social sciences, into law, and I think it was a process where I learned that law neither operate or get implemented in vacuum, nor does it get enacted in a vacuum. So you can think of from law making to laws implementation, all these are social processes, and hence there are several social forces, like you can think of caste, class, gender, sexuality, religion, belief, all these several factors that play a significant role in these, right? So you can think of criminalization and decriminalization, for example. So, when something becomes a crime, when something is not a crime. So you can think of homosexuality, for example. You can think of domestic abuse, for example. So there are certain examples of behaviors which were not criminal in the past, but are criminal now. Similarly, from the other way around as well, which were criminal in the past, but no more criminal now, right? So all these, I think, were interesting factors. Similarly, you can think of the law and morality relationship as well, right? Use and misuse of law, or also the violence of law. So all these are different factors that shaped, or let's say motivated me and sparked my interest in social legal research. I was always willing to look at, okay, there is a law, first why it came into being, and then how that law can be implemented, right? If that law can be implemented, who will implement these? And who will be the subjects of that law, right? So all these factors, I think, play important role. And I think these were the factors that shaped my journey towards becoming an interdisciplinary researcher and academic. Because law also can't be looked at just from the legal perspective. And as I said, all these sociological factors, political factors, they all play important role in law making and laws implementation, right? So then my interest got into history, politics. So I started reading around other social sciences subjects as well. So I started reading on politics, I started reading on history. So all of that then came together, I think, and made me the so-called interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary researcher. I started looking at different things. As an example, say I also then started looking at architecture. So I have worked on court architecture, for example, for my MPhil thesis. Now, moving on to the second part of this question, which is, the significant life events or moments that influenced me to pursue this career. Now, certainly, your background plays a big role, as I said earlier, in what you do, even what you dream of doing. I think there as well, your background plays a big role, because sometimes even what you don't dream of or can't dream of, you fulfill that. Because, it's like if you have never heard of something like Mars, you can never think of reaching Mars, right? And that's why your background plays a big role, because what you get to hear, it ought to happen either in the family or at schools, right? When you're a kid. And if your family is not in a particular kind of, profession, or the schools don't have that kind of environment, then you don't get to hear about these things. And then it becomes difficult, right, for you to even dream of certain things. So I think uh, going by, I think this kind of a socio-economic background, especially in relation to caste, I would say they do not realize these things because parents do not want their kids to be open to this kind of a trauma of caste or casteism, right? And but we also know that it exists in all spaces, right? That we occupy, especially talking about Indian subcontinent, be it India, be it Pakistan, be it Bangladesh. I think it runs across the religion as well, right? Now, as I said, it exists in all spaces you occupy since your childhood. In a caste society like the Indian subcontinent, and particularly India because of its 80%, let's say, Hindu population. So, who are your teachers in school? And then in colleges, who are the actors and singers and directors and producers and magicians? Who are the news anchors? Who are the advocates, judges, doctors? If you look around these things, you get to realize, right, from your experiences and from these other spaces, that who are the people who are there, right? Then you, as you grow, you tend to get into, let's say, love relationships, then marriages. Then even there, you then get to see, okay, what is it that's playing a role? Is there a lens that people are putting up in choosing, right, selecting their partners? So actually, these things cuts across all spheres of life. I think that's where I want to go. And more so, the linkage between caste and profession is also very solid still, even after, let's say, so many years of independence, let's say, of India, or let's say the Indian subcontinent. And it's like 100% social reservation, if not legal, so to speak. So for certain communities in educational cultural spaces, it has been, socially reserved because of this graded hierarchical caste system, right? Now, in terms of entering academia, and I'll be brief now, I think it started from the Nalsar University in Hyderabad, where I did my first classroom teaching. So that's the incident, or let's say event, that motivated me. And then I went to the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, which certainly played a big role, and something which I think my then partner helped with as well. And I think I was on the path of becoming a researcher and teacher. And another factor I would say that has kept me in this profession now, as I have become a lecturer now, is, I think, the ability and the freedom to question the government and its policies, or the state as its citizen and stakeholder. The freedom to ask questions, to speak, to write, to spread awareness through teaching, speaking, and writing. I think these are very important factors for me to be an academic, a researcher, and to stay in academia. So I think, these were the factors that really sparked my interest, and that is keeping me, I think, on the path of continuing my research and teaching.
Yeah, your
Thanks.
journey is very fascinating to know. As you mentioned about background plays the crucial part in our life. So, what do your personal background and identity play in informing your approach to teaching and engaging with students from diverse socio-economic, educational, and professional backgrounds?
Uh, Thanks, Heman, for the question. I think certainly, as I said it, your personal background identity does, they do play a very important role. And, from your social, economic, and educational background, the city you come from, you then understand, I think, these factors when you teach and when you look at your students, and especially if the student demography is diverse in nature. So, sort of say, for example, me coming from a really kind of a small town in Bihar, which is in northeastern side of India, and my first, I think, 7 years were in Hindi medium, though again, it was a private school. So certainly I was privileged there. Um, Again, then in terms of social background, the discrimination that you see, not that much, but then again, as I said, in subtle hidden forms, gradually growing up. And so I think all of that then gives you an understanding that you need to look at and understand when you are teaching in a classroom, when you're interacting, engaging with your students. So say you then learn the value of language. You understand that, okay, is it a first language? Is it a second language? So say, for example, what happens, and this is from my experience now, 6 years in the UK and other parts of the world, mostly the Western world, and then my first 25 years or 28 years in India. You learn that, okay, language is just a mode of communication. It's not a class representation or a power representation or a caste representation, right? And this is very significant because otherwise you tend to see that people are usually mocked, teachers are usually mocked if you are unable to speak fluent English, especially in the Indian subcontinent, especially in private schools and colleges. Whereas in this part of the world, there is this understanding and recognition that, okay, this is not your first language. You might have a different mother tongue, different from English. And there is that understanding and recognition. So you're not mocked, right? And you have people from different backgrounds whose first language is not English. So I think that's very important. Then I think it's about being empathetic, being approachable, and being a good listener, which is, I think, on one hand, is a kind of general set of skills that one needs to have, I would say, to become a good teacher, become a good human being as well, but then to become a good teacher as well. And I think then you have to create a safe and respectable space for questions and debates in the classroom. So you understand that, okay, even if we might have difference in our opinions, we can't kill each other, shout at each other. There has to be that kind of a respectable environment that, okay, even the difference of opinion can exist and we can then debate. We can learn from each other in the classroom as well, right? So I think that also needs to be there. And I think your background plays a big role in that because you then do not just outrightly reject the alternative understanding of an issue, right? The experience, because it might be that I never had a particular kind of experience, but then the other person had. So you can't just negate that, oh, I don't think that exists. I don't think that it might have happened, because then you are negating the experience of the other person. So I think this is also very important. Then it's about, I think, supporting skills development. So, for example, teaching, right, or reading or writing. I have seen in my, let's say, last 15 years, or let's say, around 15 years when I went into higher education and then research and teaching, that reading, writing, and teaching shouldn't be based on what family you are born into and what your parents do. This is something skill-based, right? And not only these professions, even other, let's say, I'll pull in this example of manual scavenging, for example, right? Or these kind of other physical labor works. So we have intellectual labor works, we have physical labor works. So who does what? All these are skill-based work. So there should be this skill development, irrespective of your background. It shouldn't be that, okay, I'm born in a particular family, then I tend to get to read and write and become a teacher. That shouldn't be the case. So I think that detachment of, let's say, one's social background, be it in terms of caste primarily, from profession, that has to be there. And I think even after 75 years of independence, I think India has still been struggling, though of course improving, but still a big chunk, especially if you look at the educational and cultural spaces, you'll find it's mostly, say, so-called upper caste, or especially the Brahmin community, people who still occupy or hegemonize these spaces. So I think that's very important because we have never understood all these works and professions as skill-based. We think, okay, because we are born in this caste, then we should be doing that. or sometimes we are forced to do that as well. So I think these are important factors that we need to understand. Let's say, for example, a quick example I can think of is from the UK. Now, here, students at school level, college level are trained in reading, writing. So, irrespective of where you come from, what's your background, what your parents do, you get to learn these skills, right? Even when you become a teacher, you have training skills at each stage, different stages. I think these should be something that India and the Indian subcontinental countries should look at and try to implement. So I think this kind of a delinking of caste and profession is very important. And as I
You,
said, I think these are the factors that played big roles.
yeah, you have beautifully explained that the combination of background and the caste. So while going through your research, I found out that the POCSO law aims to provide child-friendly procedure and spaces for victims during the criminal process. Based on your research, what are some of the challenges you faced in implementing these provisions?
Okay. Um, uh, I think before that, there was another issue, I think, which was around caste discrimination, how that plays a role in accessing justice for lower caste children who are victims of sexual violence. So I would start from, let's say, there was this case which got famous from, I think, Rajasthan, which is a Delta Meghwal case. There was a teenage girl from Dalit community who was, I think, killed, was found in a tank later on in a training school, I think, became a big issue. I think two of the three, as in I think all were from upper caste accused people. And there have been similar other cases where you have children from especially Dalit community as either the survivor or the victim of these cases. Now, we need to understand, as I said earlier, this linkage between caste and profession. Now, what happens is, because usually if you look at the urban centers, then these lower caste, lower class residents, they tend to frequently work in low wage ad hoc occupations, right? Similarly, in rural areas, again, you have no lack of materials or let's say facilities for people who are from lower caste communities, right? So in both rural and urban areas, that's the situation in which the lower caste communities are hugely, because we need to acknowledge that in a country like India, and as I said, the caste society or Indian subcontinent, generally caste and class overlap. Okay, so most of the people from low caste will also be the people from lower class as well. Now, for that reason, even the female members of the family need to work to pay the bills, sometimes in daily wage work. And what happens is that then the children become an easy target for any type of sexual assault when their parents are not present, right? Now, this will be, of course, in those cases where either there is a stranger involved in sexual offense, child sexual violence case, or some other sort of known person who is known to the child or the family, okay? Now, sometimes, of course, young kids are also hired as domestic workers. Now, that also renders them susceptible to child sexual offenses, right? Now, we need to understand that child sexual violence also acts as a caste violence, okay? So, like a caste and gender slavery that in modern sense that still plays, continue to play a big role. And I think I'm reminded of two very important works and issues involved here. I think one was by Vinci Wilson, which was around Devdasi girls. So the act you just said, POCSO Act, which is the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, which is a decade-old act, came in 2012. Now, Wilson talks about Devdasi girls. So Devdasis are sort of, in English, slaves of God. So talks of Devdasi girls who are sort of dedicated, initiated into sexual activity, and involved in commercial sexual activity at children. Now, there's a provision in POCSO Act which says that it's mandatory to report even suspicion that an offense is likely to be committed. Now, despite the enactment of such strong legislation, really young girls from the socioeconomically weak families in northern Karnataka, which is one of the southern states in India, are still dedicated as Devdasis today and being sexually abused and exploited by their own families and communities in the name of tradition, culture, and lineage. Now, this Devdasi practice, it's a long-standing tradition of dedicating, these prepubescent, pubescent girls as Devdasis, slaves of God, who are then commercially, sexually exploited for the rest of their lives, which is an appalling custom, to say the least. And to this day, and this is a report from National Human Rights Commission in India. So she argues for the need to address this practice as a criminal offense to be prosecuted under the legislation, and that there has to be efforts to explicitly connect this practice or malpractice and child sexual abuse in the minds of the public, law enforcement agencies, and government officials. So that's one, and which is very important, because you'd say that there are so many girls who are still, in the name of tradition and caste-based practice, let's say, are forced into this. Another very interesting and sort of say heart-wrenching stories from Madhya Pradesh, a central state in India, and this is from Bachra caste girls. So again, another caste-based, you can say, violence, sexual violence, child sexual violence. Now, this again, an interesting case of how poverty and caste discrimination means that children in that village, it's called Sagar Gram in that Madhya Pradesh state, which are being groomed by their own families for sexual abuse. And this was also reported a few years back in the Guardian newspaper here. Now, the girls in that area, they lie next to a highway. They are groomed for their life, virtually from birth. Now, parents decide which of their daughters will fetch the best price. Older girls teach them how to attract customers from passing trucks and cars. The younger ones, sometimes they stow under beds and they observe the other girls at work. Now, what's happening here is that the most Bachra caste men, they do not work, okay? And only the lowest paid or most degrading jobs are available to them anyway. So then they rely on their children. And you'd be surprised to know that the sex ratio is really inverted in that area. So you have more girls than boys. And this is one of the major factors for that. So they actually rely on their children. They wait on their porches with the rest of the family while their daughters are inside with customers. Now, the investigation and inquiry from these men sort of turned out to be that they cannot move their family outside of a Bachra village, as they argued that nobody would rent property to someone from their caste, and the so-called higher caste communities nearby, they consider their very presence polluting. So you can see that these problems, how they link, the linkage between caste, profession, lack of, jobs to then take you out and your family from this horrible situation and practice, right? It's also interesting to look at, say, the certain data around the victims and the perpetrator's profile. And I'll say something around India, and then I'll also touch on Pakistan, because it's really interesting what I got to know. So if you look at the victim's gender profile, so talking about the crimes against children, in India, in a year, you have around 150,000 crimes against children, out of which 50,000 are under this very act, the POCSO Act. Okay. Now you can imagine, and if you go back to my first question, which was around lawmaking and its influence. So before 2012, there used to be only around 2,000 to 9,000 child sexual abuse cases in India. But you can imagine since 2014 or 2015, it went up to 50,000 per year. And that was because of that law right? Um, Now, if you look at the victims profile in India, 99% of child sexual abuse victims are female and only 1% is male. And this is the NCRB data, which is a government organization. Whereas if you look at the, Pakistan, it's really interesting that um, around 4,000 to 5,000 child sexual abuse cases are there in a year. Um, And out of, if you look at the gender profile of victims, only, let's say, comparing to India, 55% of victims are female and 45% are male. So in India, whereas only 1% victims are male, in Pakistan, it's 45%. And this was a shocking revelation for me when I was reading around India, and it's kind of a comparative study of Indian subcontinent. And I was wondering what could be the reason. Is it about religion? Is it about something else? Is it about lack of this understanding that boys can also be sexually abused? So I saw that a lot of sodomy cases were there in Pakistan in comparison to India. So that's a very fascinating sort of gender side of it. Now, if you look at the age, and this is where, again, lawmaking comes in, which is the age of consent issue, right? So what's the age of consent to get indulged in a sexual activity? So in India, 85 to 90% of child sexual abuse victims are in the age group of 12 to 18 years. And more than 50% are in the age group of 16 to 18 years. Now, what happened under this law is that earlier the age of consent was 16. It was increased to 18. Now, I don't know what's the age of consent in Pakistan is right now. But then because of that enhancement is age of consent from 16 to 18, you have this big problem because now, and the way Indian law, the POCSO Act defines child sexual abuse or offenses is any cases involving any child or adolescent less than 18 years, that will be considered as a child sexual offense, right? So even if, say, there is a 17-year-old boy or a girl indulging in sexual activity with another 17-year-old boy or girl, or let's say, a 18 plus, a major man or a woman, they will be charged with sexual offense. So it is because the consent is not recognized. It's not a legal consent. So that's another very, I think, important issue. Another is the perpetrator's profile. So who are these people who are committing these offenses? So as I said, it's about, is it the strangers, as we usually assume, who will be committing these offenses? Or is it some known person, family members? So if I look at the data in India, 95% of perpetrators of child sexual abuse are known to the victim and their family or their family. So 95% are known. So you can imagine it means that someone is keeping an eye or looking for a chance, opportunity to then commit child sexual offense, right? And also it's about accessibility, how accessible those children are and how vulnerable they are. That then leads to these kind of offenses being committed by the known persons. Now, out of those 95%, 10% are family members. Okay, so 10% are family members. It means it could be, parent, it could be someone known, part of the family. It could be uncle, auntie, grandparent. So all these instances are there. Now, we should acknowledge that child sexual violence is one of the most underreported crime, especially in a society like India or Indian subcontinental society. And still, we do see these kind of numbers now coming up. Now, as I said, it's a hidden problem in India, and it's largely ignored, both in social discourse as well as by the criminal justice system. People don't want to talk about it. They think, why should I talk about child sexual violence? No one commits it, or it's not something to be talked about and discussed, right? Now, coming to the question of child-friendly procedures and spaces for victims during criminal process, and what my research found in terms of challenges faced in implementing these procedures. So, I can divide it into three parts. So if a student of law who understands, let's say, criminal justice process, so there's this pre-trial, trial, and post-trial stages, right? So In pre-trial, I think it's about underreporting, medical test, and police investigation. So the challenges were around, let's say, you know, who gets to report the incident if something like this happened in the family, right? Or an incident of child sexual abuse took place. Who will report it? When will they report it? Right? Can they report it? Right? So what kind of environment is there? If, say, I go to report a child sexual abuse incident, will the police say, oh, no, go away, or will not believe me? So certainly I can say that the reporting has improved because of this stringent law, and of course because of the way feminist movements and feminist and child rights activists and organizations have been working. But still, it continues. Second is medical test and police investigation. So say once these kind of sexual offenses take place, it's very important to have the medical test of the victim and perpetrator, or say, all these DNA tests and all that we usually come across in some TV series or movies as well nowadays to know about. So say that's also not there in a way which should be. It should be. So say, for example, there has to be awareness among doctors, nurses, there has to be good hospitals, and there has to be this timely intervention by police or support person that, okay, the incident took place, it has been reported. It's their duty to take the victim as soon as possible for the medical test. But you'll see that, there's really great ignorance on their part or negligence on their part. So police will delay, doctors will delay, there might not be good facility because the hospitals are in really bad shape. And we know that how, especially in the Indian subcontinent, the public hospitals are not that good. And this is something that I'll touch on later, which is around this public and private issue, the privatization and how that is hampering, especially the marginalized communities as well. Now, another issue is about, let's say, trial. Now, at trial level, you have the victim support and secondary victimization issue. Okay, so you need to protect the children, these child victims, from the court setup, right? You need to provide support, emotional support. You can't question them as you would question an adult person, right? So the sensitivity needs to be there. The awareness needs to be there. The empathy needs to be there. So all of that needs to be there. Now, my findings suggest that things have improved a bit in Delhi, which is the capital city, but not in Bihar, which was my other focus of my PhD research work, right? And I think major parts of the country, in say India, I think is still facing this problem of lack of implementation of the law during the trial stage. Now, coming to post-trial, this is about now compensation and rehabilitation. And one of the most interesting situations that came up while I interviewed my stakeholders, judges and lawyers and all, was, say, for example, there's a family, a very marginalized community family, let's say lower caste, lower class family. Now, if the parent has committed sexual violence on child or someone else, then it's important to rehabilitate them, to give them financial support, compensation, right? Because if the parent has committed the violence, then parent will be put behind bars. And let's say if the parent, the father was the only earning member of the family, then how the mother and other children will sustain, right? So that becomes a very sort of complex issue here. How the government, how we as society should look at this. How can we best respond to these issues? Because, of course, if you provide, say, for example, 50,000 or 1 lakh rupees as compensation, how long will that sustain, say, a family of a woman and her 4 children or 3 children, right? If the working member, which is the father, is behind the bars. So these are very important issues that come up, right? Then the issues around training, because, of course, one would assume that stakeholder training is important. So to train the judges, the lawyers, the police officers, the support persons, I think all of that is important. And then to have this special infrastructure as well, right? Because, of course, you wouldn't want the child to be brought to court. So what kind of setting you need to have where the child doesn't come to court, right? Where the child is not sort of doesn't get to encounter these kind of spaces which might be traumatizing for them, right? Which might secondarily victimize them, right? Re-victimize them. Then this also links to the representation, right? Representation among these stakeholders. Because, of course, if the intention, the goal of the law and its implementation is for entire country, then the entire country needs to be represented. Now, if only, say, for example, the judges, the police officers, and the lawyers belong to certain communities, that might in itself be a problem. Because, say, there might be children from SC, ST, OBC communities. These are the legal categories, right? Scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, other backward class communities. Now, their representation ought to be there in, among these stakeholders. And I think that is severely lacking, even now after so many decades of India's independence. Now, if you look at, say, implementation, and I'll give you data from 2019-20, it's again, say, police disposal. So only 70% of cases that come for police investigation are actually completed, where the police conducts investigation, right? So 30% cases remain pending. Now, out of these, only 10% cases then are where the trial is completed. So 90% of cases do not even see trial in a timely basis. And you can imagine that now this piles up. So 30% cases pending investigation, police investigation, and 90% cases pending trial by court. And each year, all these extra pending cases will be added to the fresh ones, and it becomes a burden. It's really hard. Even I think the timelines that are mentioned in the law are not practical because of lack of infrastructure, lack of training. And I think these are important factors that need to be looked at. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It is really shocking the data you mentioned about the India and Pakistan earlier. So with that, how do sociological attitudes and existing legal culture contribute to the barrier to accessing justice for both victim and accused individual?
Yeah, very important question. Thank you. Because again, we can connect whatever I said earlier. So there's this culture of silence around child sexual abuse cases. There's this culture of disbelief. So usually it's like, oh, the child must be lying. Oh, the child must have been tutored, right? Even within the family, one would say, oh, the child must be imagining, or say, for example, an uncle committed some sexual abuse. Now, there will be this kind of disbelief that, oh, no, or sometimes this kind of stigma and shame that is there, especially in Indian subcontinental societies. That, okay, if we speak about it, then, what will happen? There are also issues around marriage, especially if, as I said, 99% victims in India are females. So the issue comes up around marriage. Oh, if the world gets to know, if our community, if our society gets to know about this girl being child sexual abuse victim, then how will she get married? Who will marry her? So, and all of this connects to our very sort of parochial kind of a backward mindset. And I think it's a surprise that still there are people, and this is from my experience with engagement with people in India. So there's still this idea of virginity, marrying sort of virgin girls, or thinking about this from a property perspective, like women as property. And I think these are very troublesome understandings, and there needs to be awareness about it. And I think that plays a big role. Then, of course, there's this legal culture, let's say, adult-centric courtroom language, though things have been changing since the passage of this act, but it's really snail pace, very slow. Because, of course, you need to have different set of questions. The mode of questioning need to be different during the trial. So you can't ask a child, okay, did that person insert, say, for example, his penis? Where did he do so? Because let's say it's a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, 12-year-old child. Now, the child might even not be aware of these terms and might be traumatized again if they are aware of it. And I think these are very important, sensitive issues. And that's why, this kind of a culture, because also we should understand that in this kind of we say common legal system, where the trial takes place, you have the defense and the prosecution, and they literally fight with each other in a court of law to win the case. And the defense can go to any extent. And there's this very important issue of, let's say, sexual history, or let's say, it's like character assassination. Right? So those are very important issues, and they play around this, especially the defense lawyers. So I think they need to be checked, that need to be controlled by the judges, by the law. Another issue is, I think, also around age and the fraud that goes around age. Say, for example, someone is below 18, then through coercion or bribing, you make them above 18, so that they are no more child and they don't go through this child-centric system, right? So that's another very important issue that needs to be, I think, tackled. Then the age of consent, which I said earlier. So there is this idea around familial and parental control of sexual autonomy of children, especially the adolescents, right? So age of consent comes into picture. And recently, I think one of the high courts in India, I think it's Madhya Pradesh High Court, which suggested the central government to reduce the age of consent back to 16 from 18. Because you can imagine, and there also you have religion and caste playing a big role. So say, for example, if I'm a casteist or communal person, I would like my child to be married to same, or have even a relationship to be within, with the same caste or same religion person. In case she gets into, let's say, a relationship with another caste or another religion person, I get pissed off. I'll file a false case, or I'll file a case. I'll try to control that. And I think particularly in Indian subcontinent, this is a big issue still. Say, for example, any day I keep looking at these news items where Hindu guy, random Hindu person, let's say a group of young people, they're beating up, or let's say abusing a Muslim woman because a Muslim woman was seen with a Hindu man. Hindu woman, because a Hindu woman was seen with a Muslim man. Similarly, you have Muslim men now. Now Muslim men are abusing and beating Muslim women because the Muslim woman was seen with a Hindu man. Now, you really would never see these incidents in this part of the world. I never see, say, for example, a white man abusing and beating a white woman because she was seen with a black man here, or a brown man here, or an Asian man here. Now, I think we need to understand why that is happening. Like why, say, for example, a random street person who has no connection with that girl thinks that he can approach the girl and her partner, right, or her boyfriend or girlfriend, and abuse them. What gives them this kind of a right? So we need to, I think, tackle that very understanding to control this. And this is, in a way, let's say, not happening. Now, again, coming to accused. Now, accused, again, are mostly from socioeconomically marginalized community. So they have to rely on free state legal aid because they can't, say, hire a good lawyer for themselves, right? Now, this becomes a problem if there is not a good standard, good quality of free state legal aid, because then they won't have good defense for themselves, and they can easily be abused by the legal process or by the legal system. So there has to be awareness of legal rights as well. So they need to be informed, aware about that, what kind of legal rights they have. And that is, again, something which needs to be worked on. And you can see caste discrimination violence, caste violence here too. And I recall a case where I think a Dalit man was falsely accused of a child sexual abuse by a upper caste person. And then he was actually put behind bars and was released after many years due to lack of evidence. So you can see it works for both victims and the accused.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Caste discrimination remains a significant issue in many societies, including Pakistan and significantly in India. How would you describe the current state of caste discrimination and it affects marginalized community, particularly Dalits and OBCs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think caste discrimination, although it has been abolished, outlawed, but it's still, I think, the social organizational tool, and all the social and familial interactions are based on it. So we need to look at how sort of law is enacted, organized based on caste and by whom and for what, right? So I think uh, still I often see these kind of caste-based violence and discrimination. And I recall, I think because there is less awareness and the teaching around these issues are not there at school level and college level. And I recall, there's this, to begin with, I think I can think of Ambedkar, B.R. Ambedkar's Baba Saheb's 4 texts, which are very important. I think should be read by every single person. And I'll just name those for the, to help the audience. First is the annihilation of caste, very important. Then the second is, I think, the Pakistan or partition of India. Third is who were the Shudras, which is, I think, around the Shudra community, the so-called OBCs, and then the untouchables. I think these 4 works, in my opinion, should be made essential reading in schools and colleges to have a very nuanced understanding of these issues. There are also other works I can think of. I think Manoj Mitta's recent book, Caste Pride, which fills the historical gap in the study of the legal aspect of caste and offers a comprehensive, long-term perspective on the legal trajectory of caste and its impact on resistance and reform. There are also other books. I can think of Suraj Yengre's Caste Matters. And then there is I think, Dalit Feminist Theory book. Then there is also a very interesting book called The Caste of Merit by Ajanta Subramaniam. Because very often you see when you talk about affirmative action, caste-based reservation, people start talking about, merit. We need to look at merit. So I think that needs to be tackled intelligently as well. And these 2 books, The Caste of Merit, and then there is another one, The Tyranny of Merit by Michael Sandel, which came recently. I think these are very important texts that people need to read. And we need to actually understand that it's the social, economic, and cultural capital that works, that helps you acquire a certain kind of merit, even though there could be certain biological factors, but then these are the prominent factors, right? And I can also think of recent problematic, very disappointing decision by the US Supreme Court on, affirmative action based on race, where Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson gave a dissenting opinion, a fantastic dissenting opinion. And I can think now how that will have an impact on the discourse of caste-based reservation in India. So certainly, I think this is a problem, and there needs to be much, much more awareness and acknowledgement on the part of the upper caste, so-called upper caste people, to understand about this caste violence and discrimination. Yeah.
When we talk about the caste discrimination, the topic of caste census always comes. It has been a topic of discussion in India for decades. Do you believe that collecting data on caste identity and could contribute to a better understanding of the prevalence and impact of sexual violence against lower caste children? Or how might such data influence policy and the interventions in this area? What are your thoughts on the importance of potential implication of caste-based census in addressing caste discrimination and ensuring social justice?
Absolutely. Now, I think I don't even understand why the debate, because it is, a common sense. If you don't know your population, how will you make policies for that population, and how will you implement those policies for that population? Now, imagine if I'm in the UK. The UK government in its census collects the data based on gender, race, right, religion or belief. Now, of course, because they collect the data based on race, gender, religion, and all, they have an idea as to, okay, what the population is comprised of, what kind of policies they need to make to, say, intervene in a certain situation. Now, if a country where you have affirmative action, like India, based on caste, if you don't know exactly or precisely what's the caste-based population is like, how would you even fix percentages and implement policies based, like affirmative action policies or any other policies for that matter? Because we know that how this sort of intersectionality also works. So we need to know, okay, caste, class, gender, how they intersect. So if you don't know what's the population of, let's say, SC community, ST community, OBC community, upper caste, how would you even enact a policy that would then ultimately benefit these communities within that Indian population? So certainly, I think it shouldn't be a debatable question at all. And I think the Indian government just should absolutely conduct caste census. And I think once done, that will have immense usefulness in both policy making as well as policy implementation.
Have you come across any specific challenge or barriers that prevent lower caste children from reporting incidents of sexual violence and assessing justice? And how do these challenges differ from those faced by children from higher caste? So this is basically related to your research.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly the intersectional experiences of children, so your socio-economic educational background plays a major role. And starting from reporting to then registration of the first information report, and then to medical tests, as I said earlier, and then police investigation. Because all these are important processes that lead to, say, justice delivery in a child sexual abuse case. And all these processes involve people who then make decisions, right? And of course, they will make decisions based on their understanding and their background as well. Because as I said, objectivity and rationality is still not that much deep-rooted in Indian society or the Indian subcontinental societies. So, if there is lack of representation among stakeholders, let's say judges, lawyers, police officers, support persons, then they might not, let's say, even register the case. They might not listen to the victims, right? They might not understand things objectively. So that's a big problem there. And I think, again, the issues around fear, stigma, marriage, these also work. Then you also have this kind of a caste and power influence, right? So say you coerce the family that, oh, you can't report that once you have committed an offense against them, being from, let's say, higher caste, right, or higher class. You can manipulate the system as you want. And then lack of financial support and lack of these kind of support system available to, say, someone from a lower caste, lower class community, it works against them then. And for children specifically, as I said, say, for example, Delta Meghwal case, it took so many sort of months to even then put that case into a proper channel. Many times it takes a big kind of a media attention for a case to be then taken seriously and to be investigated and prosecuted seriously. So these are very important because, of course, India is such a large, big country. Media cannot go for every single case. I just said, there are 50,000 cases in a year of child sexual abuse under POCSO Act in India. Now, of course, only few of them will be highlighted by media, right? So we need to have this kind of an objective system where the stakeholders have a proper representation of all communities, and then they are given proper training, and there is sufficient infrastructure as well, judicial legal infrastructure, that then together, I think, can help implement the law better and objectively.
So as you talked about this, have you observed, as stakeholders are the main, highlight in your research, have you observed any specific barriers or biases in attitudes and actions of stakeholders involved in the criminal justice system that persecutes caste discrimination and hinders access to justice for lower children who are the victims of sexual violence?
Absolutely. I would say, it's really difficult to detach or separate your private life from your public life. If you have certain belief in your private life, as I said, if you're casteist in nature, if you're communal in nature, if you believe in these things, then once you become a judge or a police officer or a lawyer, it's not that automatically you will remove those biases that are within you, right? And I did come across some of my stakeholders, which again, which is the general tendency among higher caste people as well, which is this denial of caste discrimination or caste violence. So they try to then perpetrate this myth that, oh, no, there's no caste violence, there's no caste discrimination. And then I think that then negatively influences their decision making in this criminal process. And I think that acts as a barrier to then delivering justice in child sexual abuse cases. So, say there are cases of child sexual abuse where, say, a lower caste or a child from scheduled caste or scheduled tribe has been sexually abused. So then you have this other law, which is called Scheduled Caste, Scheduled Tribe Prevention of Atrocities Act. Now they both come together, POCSO and this act. Now you'd see that there is this perpetration of myth going around by especially the higher caste people that, oh, this is always abused, this law is not utilized, this is always misused by the lower caste people. But then there is no clear evidence about it. So, there's this denial, I think, and as I said earlier, the very basic thing that needs to be done, particularly on behalf of the upper caste or higher caste people and India generally, is the acknowledgement that yes, this happens, and then to work onward from that with rationality and objectivity. Because usually I tend to see that it's caste and religion that always inform our behavior and interactions. So that needs to, I think, in a way, be done away with if that's discriminatory in nature.
As we talked about your research, now I would like to come on the way you teach. In your teaching pedagogy, you emphasize creating an inclusive and accessible space for students. How do you encourage students to question and engage with the subject matter freely?
Oh, that's a very important, interesting question. Thank you. I think I might be repetitive because, again, it's like being empathetic, being a good listener, being approachable, creating a safe and respectable space for students and for myself as well, for questioning and debates. And then you can use tools, to be more inclusive. So, say, for example, I tend to do group presentation, team assignments, or quizzes. Or I also use sometimes digital tools such as there's something called Mentimeter, which we use here, where the student can vote on a particular question as to what the right answer of that question would be. So that helps, say, those students who are shy to speak, because not all students are same. So you need to cater to the specific requirements of these different students who have these special needs, right? So I think I tend to utilize these different techniques, methods to make my classroom inclusive and accessible.
I believe that you are the one of the best teachers for your students. Last but not least, how can education and awareness play a role in challenging caste-based discrimination and promoting social equality? Are there any specific initiatives or strategies you believe are particularly effective?
Absolutely. I think education is something which is very basic and very important and can certainly play a role in challenging caste-based discrimination and promoting social equality. Now, coming back to that Ambedkar's quote about social liberty, and I would here like to distinguish between literacy and education, because it's not just about literacy; it's about education, and I think for social liberty to take place, one needs to be educated rather than just literate. And you can imagine our societies, both India, country, Pakistan, like literally it's hardly like 70, 60, 70, 80% of the population is so-called literate. Not even, education is still far beyond. And why I'm distinguishing, it's something like, I can think of another quote of Ambedkar here from the book The Untouchables, where he distinguishes between a learned person and an intellectual person. And I'll just quickly quote from that book, because that's really interesting how Ambedkar has put it, which is, he says, today all scholarship is confined to the Brahmins, but unfortunately no Brahmin scholar has so far come forward to play the part of a Voltaire, who had the intellectual honesty to rise against the doctrines of the Catholic Church in which he was brought up, nor is one likely to appear on the scene in the future. It is a grave reflection on the scholarship of the Brahmins that they should, they should have produced a Voltaire. They should not have produced a Voltaire. Now, this will not cause surprise if it is remembered that the Brahmin scholar is only a learned man. He is not an intellectual. And then Ambedkar says there is a world of difference between one who is learned, and we can make it say literate, and one who is an intellectual, which is, let's say, educated. Now, the former, which is, say, learned or literate, is class conscious and is alive to the interest of his class, whereas the latter is an emancipated being who is free to act without being swayed by class considerations. And then Ambedkar says it is because the Brahmins have been only learned man or men, they have not produced a Voltaire. So I think it's about that kind of education. So first, of course, there has to be basic literacy. And as I said, it's very important for us to, this in terms of, let's say, specific initiatives or strategies. I think larger issues like, say, land redistribution, social housing, public education, public health, caste-based reservations, affirmative action, public awareness. So I think these are larger issues that need to be tackled, because the material disadvantages that are there for those communities which are, let's say, socially and economically marginalized, mostly from lower caste. And only then I think you can think of, let's say, again, proper implementation of law and objective standard. But then more than that, it's also about, I think, from a bigger, larger perspective, it's about reversing this madness of privatization. And then by changing the way we understand development, quote unquote development today in this sort of neoliberal capitalist world. So I think it's making public institutions, be it in the sector of education, health, housing. And I don't know if you're aware, say in the UK, I think around 96% of children go to public schools. So we should think why they have never, or like they didn't go for that kind of a privatization of schools, and why in India and Pakistan we have so many private schools, private colleges, and how then that is actually acting as a tool to perpetuate inequality in every day, right? So I think this is very important, that there has to be this kind of a, maybe, I don't know, like maybe a public protest, public awareness, asking for accountability from the governments, that we should have more public institutions, more and more public institutions. Only then I think one can create a better egalitarian, I think, society. And we need to understand in the Indian concept that anti-caste, or being anti-caste, is being anti-capitalism too. So I think on that point, I'd like to then end the response to that question.
Any last words or messages that you want to tell or give to our audience?
I think it's just 2 points. One, in the context of my own subject area, which we are discussing, which is child sexual abuse. I think we need to understand the significance of this issue, and we need to be open about it, discuss it. We need to believe our children. That's the first basic thing that we can do, and we should do, if we really want to, say, eliminate this evil of child sexual abuse from our society. And generally speaking, I think from a broader perspective, it's very important for us to be educated about dignity. I think we have very less understanding of dignity, or even if we do in our societies, we don't value dignity. So I think there has to be this understanding about dignity, that irrespective of the work you do, every single human being has dignity, and that must be respected. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shailesh, for taking your time out for this interview. And I must mention that you are a very well-read person, and you talked with figures, facts, and numbers, which is really interesting, and that is going to be interesting for our audience too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I sincerely apologize, because I think I went overboard much more time I took than
I did not even realize myself that.
That's fine. So thank you so much once again, Heman, and thank you, I think, to SARIM for giving me this opportunity. Thanks for your efforts in, I think, organizing this conversation. And I hope the audience, gets to
Do like
learn something out of this conversation. Thank you so much. Have a good
yeah.
day, Heman.
Have a good day too.